In December last year, the Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh suffered a major brain hemorrhage and was hospitalized. His prognosis has been uncertain for some time now. However, in the previous weeks, the doctors have said that he's beginning to recognize familiar faces and that his prognosis is becoming much better. I've been relieved to hear this. Thich Nhat Hanh has very much been in my thoughts over the last months. If you do not know much about Thich Nhat Hanh, he is a Buddhist monk in the Zen tradition. From his life and experience, he came up with and coined the term engaged Buddhism, which he describes as using the teachings of the Buddha to bring about a more peaceful world. He has written dozens of books on this subject and others. In one of his books, he tells a story that has stuck with me over the years. It is the story of his first years as a monk when he was in Vietnam during the war. All around him there was tremendous death and suffering. People became consumed with grief for what was lost in the destruction. And so they came to ask the young monk what they should make of all of the violence and the suffering. They said that their conditions were so bad and that it had lasted for so long that they had lost hope in any kind of change. His response was this: "My Buddhist tradition teaches that everything is impermanent. Even war is impermanent. That is why I continue to work for peace." He did not deny the mess or try to minimize it. Rather, he offered a true insight about it that was able to cut through the feeling of despair and inevitability that the violence had wrought. This is a part of the value that I see in so much of his work. His most recent book carries the same title that this sermon does: No Mud, No Lotus. He begins the book with a reflection on the flowers that grow in the ponds all around the monastery that he lives in. The most beautiful, delicate flowers, the lotuses, can only grow in marsh-like conditions. The debris from other plants and animals rot in almost stagnant waters. The environment where these flowers grow is not pretty. In fact, he calls it a stinking mess. And yet, as Thich Nhat Hanh points out, the lotus cannot grow out of marble. Without the mud, there is no lotus. Tomorrow, on February 2nd, we will celebrate an ancient holiday. It's called Imbolc and was celebrated in Europe as the first of 3 spring festivals. It lives on today as Groundhog Day. In Europe, the earth was still frozen at this time of year. The skies still dark most of the time. The weather still quite unforgiving. And yet what these ancient ancestors recognized is that the very first signs of spring, its earliest edge, were beginning to break through. Perhaps a green shoot was coming up through the snow. Perhaps a tree was just beginning to come alive. I love thinking about this holy day at this time of year and what it signifies. That life can burst forth in unexpected and uncontrolled ways in the midst of surprising circumstances. That what challenges us, what is hard or harsh, is impermanent and can change. And that what is beautiful comes up from what can be bleak or bland, harsh or ugly. An old parable helps to illuminate this paradox. Once upon a time, there was a king who ruled a small kingdom. It wasn't all that great a kingdom, nor was it well known for its resources or its people or its achievements, but the king owned a diamond, a great and perfect diamond that had been in his family for generations. He kept it on display for all to see and appreciate. People came from all over the world to admire it and to gaze upon it. One day, a guard came to the king with the news that, although no one had touched the precious stone, for it was always guarded, the diamond was cracked. The king ran to see, and sure enough, there was a crack right through the middle of the diamond. Immediately, the king summoned all the jewelers in the land and had them look at the jewel. One after another, they examined it and gave the king the same bad news. The diamond was irrevocably flawed. The king was crushed, and so were his subjects. They felt that they had lost the most valuable thing that belonged to them. Then, out of nowhere, an old man came who claimed to be a jeweler. He asked to see the diamond. After examining it, he looked up and confidently told the king, "I can fix it. In fact, I can make it better than it was before." Although the king was a bit leery, he allowed the old man to work on the jewel. He placed the old man in a room with all the appropriate tools and gave him food and drink for a week. At the end of the week, the man appeared with a stone in his hand, and he handed it over to the king. The king couldn't believe his eyes. It was magnificent. The old man had fixed it, and he'd made it even better than it had been before. He had used the crack that ran through the middle of the stone as a stem and had carved an intricate, full-blown rose, leaves, and thorns into the diamond. It was an exquisite piece of art. The king was overjoyed and exclaimed, "It's incredible. You took something perfect and turned it into something even better." The old man disagreed. He said, "I didn't take something perfect and make it more so. I took something flawed and cracked at its heart and found its beauty there." So ends the story. I think that is such an important lesson. It's a way of thinking that can be something like a spiritual practice to us, one that may not fit with our typical habits of thinking. For example, some of us here today may have made New Year's resolutions, and it's day 31 for New Year's resolutions, so some of those resolutions may have already gone by the wayside. In any case, often what New Year's resolutions do is identify something that is wrong and strategize a way to get rid of it. Is the show The Biggest Loser making you feel like a big loser? Buy a fancy new gym membership. Are you sick of sitting home alone watching the show Friends? Find new friends. Can you relate too much to the show The Worst Jobs in History? Then put your resume together. It's always about getting away from what you have or who you are. I have done my share of that sort of change, mostly to very little degrees of success. Thich Nhat Hanh says that is a habit of thinking that leads to chronic unhappiness because we end up training ourselves to always want what we do not have. As soon as we think that we have escaped, we find something new to be dissatisfied with. Rather, like the flowers that come up out of the mud, there is something to be said for looking for possibility in the present. It's about self-acceptance as the starting place. It's about finding beauty in what we have and who we are. As many of you know, I am a person with a disability. I have never been able to be in the sun for more than about 10 minutes without getting an excruciating, indescribably painful sunburn. In many ways, this has been a curse, and I've wanted it to be gone for most of my life. And yet I've also come to appreciate the gifts that have come through this experience of having this disability. My love for reading, for learning about other religions and studying theology all started because they were pastimes that I could do indoors. This week I passed the defense of my dissertation, and I owe so much of that to my particular life circumstance. Today I recognize that some of the most beautiful flowers in my life came from some of the thickest mud. Thich Nhat Hanh offers a story about this in his new book. I'd like to share it here as I wrap up the sermon today. It's a story about the cousin of the Buddha whose name was Badya. Badya was the governor of a province in the kingdom of Shakya, which is present-day India. One day, a number of his friends who were monks and students of the Buddha came to him and invited him to join their community. He hesitated. As governor, he had at his command many soldiers, a lot of wealth, and a very powerful position. But finally, his friends persuaded him. The night before he left, he wept for everything that he was leaving behind. But he left it all and came empty-handed to the forest where he was ordained by the Buddha as a monk. He didn't have a fancy house to live in anymore. He only had 3 robes, 1 bowl, and a mat to sit on. One night, Badya was meditating at the foot of a tree, and suddenly he uttered, "Oh, my happiness, oh, my happiness." It happened that another monk was sitting nearby. The other monk thought that Badya regretted having abandoned his position as the governor. So in the early morning, the monk went to the Buddha and reported to him, "Dear teacher, late last night I was sitting in meditation, and suddenly I heard the monk Badya exclaiming, 'Oh, my happiness, oh, my happiness.' I think he must have a problem." The Buddha went for Badya, and in front of a group of monks, the Buddha said, "Badya, is it true that last night during sitting meditation you pronounced 2 times the sentence, 'Oh, my happiness'?" Badya responded, "Yes, noble teacher, I did pronounce that sentence twice." "Could you explain to us why you have pronounced those 3 words during the night?" the Buddha asked. Badya said, "Dear teacher, when I was governor, my palace was guarded by hundreds of soldiers, but I was still very afraid. I was afraid robbers would come and kill me, or at the least take away all of my valuables. So day and night I lived in fear. But last night I realized that now I have nothing to lose and no reason to fear. I was sitting out in the forest at the foot of a tree, and never in my life have I felt so safe, so at peace. I realized I have everything that I need. Nobody envies me, and I have nothing for anyone to steal. No wealth, no power, no jewels. I have nothing. And yet, I finally have everything. I am touching happiness and freedom, and that is why I pronounce the words, 'Oh, my happiness, oh, my happiness.'" So ends the story. Today, as we reflect upon the seeds that we have planted in honor of this ancient holiday of Imbolc, I invite us to reflect upon what flowers you would like to see flourish in your own life, and how those flowers can emerge not apart from or separate from, but rather within your present circumstances. Remember, without the mud, there is no lotus. Amen. I love you, and blessings on your journey.